Hello and welcome to another guide. I'm going to be going over the class commando and specifically Gunnery commando. Let's launch right in and load up my character. I'm going to go through the rotation that I've created and some of the stats, gearing, some of that kind of stuff, and a little bit of the mentality around playing as a DP. So first thing that you're going to want to know when you're doing any characters, you're going to want to be able to have the guide to know what their class rotation is, know what their abilities are, stuff like that. So, definitely I'm going to go over stuff in here. I might not cover everything, and you might find that you need to go and look at an additional guide. That's totally fine. I do have a written guide on Reddit as well. And remember to link that in the description for you. So, first thing about a DPS. Now, depending what content you're playing, your role is going to be a little bit different. So, when you're just goofing around, you're doing open world content with a small group by yourself, you're out doing some flashpoints, easy content. It's not necessarily going to be the same playstyle and focus as when you're doing hard mass mode flashpoints, raiding content, so on. So, when we look at single target boss fights, generally you're going to have to make sure you're trying to avoid taking damage, but doing the most damage as possible. And a lot of times, there's not a lot of damage you have to avoid from the boss itself, because usually there'll be a tank soaking up the majority of that damage and taking the threat for you. But, at the same time, you also want to think about things like, well, I don't want to rip too much threat off of the tank all the time. As a DPS, your goal is technically to do so much damage that you get threat over the tank, because you want to have the highest damage output possible. But you've also got a threat drop, which reduces threat towards all current enemies, and smart timing of that can be quite important. In terms of using your defensives, again, really depends on the content you're doing. Some boss fights, you have to save it for very specific points during the boss fight, and maybe you don't even have to use it at all in easier content. When we're talking about doing flashpoints and that kind of content, well, you might be needing to use them a lot. Or if you're in a raid and you're killing a lot of smaller, weaker enemies between the bosses, you might find you're going to have to use it a lot. So the first thing I want to go over is just a little bit about how I set up my UI. Now, it's not going to be the same for everybody. We're all going to be a little bit different, and that's okay. If you're not a subscriber, obviously you won't have as many bars. What I've generally done is my top bar in the middle here is my general rotation. So this is where all of my abilities go that are dealing damage is in here, plus some other useful abilities that I usually want to have quick access to. Off to the right, I leave a bunch of utility stuff. So I've got, when I'm playing with a companion out, I can use my Unity Heroic Moment. I could move those over to the area with over here where I've got all my defensives. Up to you, but I've got some things like Stealth Scan, the Combat Revive, my little off heals, field droids, so on. And then down here, as we kind of briefly went into, this is where I've got my defensive abilities, and then I also keep some of my other abilities that aren't directly damaging. So, my knockback, my hold the line, which prevents movement and parrying effects and knockbacks, etc. And then in this quick bar here, I like to keep the remainder of my adrenals and some other utility stuff. So up here, I'll have my stim. I'm going to have my class buffs. I'm going to have my class energy and health regen. And then I've got a few other utilities that aren't too useful. And then stims, health packs, adrenals and health packs. And then quick travel, rocket boot. What I've done for me to hotkey stuff is I've used Quickbar 6 for some unique one-off hotkeys that are shared between every single character. So I've got Interrupt, is always hotkeyed the same on every account. My Self-Cleanse, my Defensive that's kind of a self-heal is generally here. And then I've got my Mount, I've got my Threat Drop, I've got my other mount for Rocket Boots, which can be used when your mount can't be used. And then I've got another defensive ability hotkeyed here. And so within my tank classes, I might be a little different because I'm going to have a taunt and an AoE taunt, and then generally maybe an extra defensive like my Saber Reflect or my Stealth Out of Combat, etc. The more you can hotkey and the better you can get with that. They're probably going to be easier as long as all the hotkeys are easy to reach and they make sense to you. But it's still alright if you want to just click your buttons to do your attacks instead of using hotkeys. It's not going to completely prevent you from doing hard content in the game. So that's not a big deal. So a few other things if we open up the user interface editor that we want to look at. So I can have, different profiles saved depending on which character I want. Is it going to be my tanking profile, my DPS setup? I try and keep it consistent since I have so many characters and it makes it a bit easier. So we've got our operation frames set up off to the side. It's your choice where you want to put them. I like to just keep them off to my side. I've got group frames that are off the screen, actually even further over to the side. One big thing is system messages. This is the red text that tells you important things during combat, tells you certain mechanics are happening. I've maxed out that scale and I moved it fairly far down my screen to make it easier to read. We've got focus target. You can put that wherever you want. I've just left it up here. Make sure the cast bar is enabled for focus target. So I've just left it up there. On my tank setup, it's going to be a bit different where my focus target will be. So down here, I've got target of target. I don't have a cast bar. Target of target, I basically have this up as a DPS just to say, is the target looking at me or the tank? That's a general idea of having that there. I've decided to move I've moved my cast bar right here over top of the center. I've moved my debuffs here and I have not scaled them up, but they're here because it's quite important to be able to see your debuffs and know what's going on. And then my buffs aren't as important, especially on this character. I don't use them as much, so I move them off to the side. So again, you can play around with this, whatever you think fits you best. Players have a lot of different ways that they go about setting up their player interface, and there's no one perfect solution. So we will quit that. That's my interface. That's kind of my setup. That's how I've done everything. I've only got abilities out on my bars that I actually find useful, and then I've got a few extras because I do have the extra room to put them out, but some of them aren't super useful. All right, so I think what we'll do before we get into the main rotation, everything, we'll talk about your gearing. So there's quite a few processes around gearing, whether you're doing 70 content or 75 content. General train of thought is for players who don't have as much gear, you're going to want to just gear yourself towards level 75 content because you're not going to see a humongous loss in gear stats if you gear for 75, and you'll be able to do quite well in 75 content. Whereas, there's very little in the game that's 75 content, so it's nice to have gear that's built around level 70 and get some of the bonuses we can get with the way that level sync and level scaling work. So right now, the set that I've got on is geared towards level 70. So this is the Apex Predators set, which is considered the best set to play Gunnery Commando with, although I have found that the Concentrated Fire set also does extremely well. I've set that up for level 75 content. Our tactical is going to be Primed Ignition, no ifs, ands, or buts. This is absolutely critical to dealing good damage on this class, having the Primed Ignition tactical be the first thing that you get before you even get your set bonus. We do have Thermal Nuclear Fusion, which can help us with our AoE damage, but it's not very often that you actually get to effectively use this. So a lot of times it's better to just leave it off and just focus on single target priority. How we're looking at our stats for level 70. So right now we're showing up as level 75. So here's all of our stats. You're not going to notice that they get capped or set to a certain value. So when we go to level 70, which the set is designed for, our mastery will get capped, our endurance will get capped, our power will be set to a fixed value. So my gear does have more than that fixed value, but one thing that you'll notice is I'm not using lethal mods. So power, we don't need to add any to power. That's why it's such a low number for a level 75 set. Because in level 70 content, it's going to be set to a fixed value. I don't need the extra power. Our critical will be based on whatever we have, so we want to get as high of critical as we can while still hitting our alacrity and accuracy. So accuracy, you got to get 1590. You want to have 110% when you go under tech. Right here, you want to hit 110.00 or higher. So 1590, you want to get as close as you can. Any extra points on accuracy is wasted for player versus environment PvP. The general thought with PvP is they usually only run 105%. Some players will run more, though. It's personal preference to play around with, I guess. Alacrity. Now, alacrity can be very confusing to pick a right number because it depends on are you using the guild perk or not and stuff like that. So right now you can see I get a 3% skill /buffs. I don't have the 5% zeal set bonus as a guild perk currently. our guild usually runs it. So most of the time I would have a different alacrity than you're seeing right now in terms of percentages. But, so just be aware of that if you're doing content and you're using that guild perk, it's kind of, I like to memorize the actual percentage of numbers that I'm going for. So usually I would be sitting at 17.26 if we had the guild perk right now, which would be higher than the recommended amount for the 1.3 GCD build. And 12.26 is way higher than I need for a 1.4 build. I forget exactly what number, it's 9 point something I would say that I like to run. The one thing that's going to be interesting is you'll notice that I don't like to gear exactly at the cutoffs I say. There's some issues with how the game handles lag and stuff. And alacrity can be really wonky. And then the other thing that's really important is if we look at the cooldown of Vortex Bolt, which is the main cornerstone of our rotation, we're going to see that it's got a cooldown time that can be very awkward to deal with. And right now it's exactly at 16 seconds, and this will change with your alacrity. All I always like to do is I always like to bring up my calculator, and I like to say, okay, so right now I'm at a 1.4 GCD build, and I'm at 16 seconds. So I'm going to go 16 divided by 1.4. We're going to get 11.4. So what that means is I get to fit 11 abilities in before it comes off cooldown, but there'll be a 0.4 of a GCD. So 0.4, that's going to be about 0.6 seconds of just sitting there waiting for Vortex Bolt. It's going to be stuck in this awkward place. So let's see if we can correct some of this right now without having the guild perk on. This is why I always carry some extra gear with me. So now this isn't going to be quite perfect. I'm only 16.32, which is a bit lower than I like. But if we look at this now, Vortex Bolt is 15.5 seconds. So I'm going to go 15.5, and I'm aiming for 12 abilities in my rotation. So I'm going to times that by, I divide that by 1.3. Oh, I did my math wrong. 5 divided by 1.3. I'm going to get 11.9, so really close to 12. So this is why I like having just a little bit higher than that. So if I go conversely 1.3 times 12, I'm going to end up with 15.6 seconds on the cooldown. So, we're technically doing great. We want to be around that 15.5. This gives us a little room for margin of error. But as I said, when you're actually in a raid environment with other players playing, you tend to have a bit of lag. So I like to actually be a little safer than sorry and have just a little extra buffer there. So this is what we're going to work with. We're going to work with 16.3 for now, which is technically a little bit more than we need, but I just like to go a little bit higher. I've got defense stat. This is something you're only ever going to do when you're doing level 70 content. For level 75, this is wasted, but in level 70, as we were talking about, your power is a fixed value, so you don't need any lethal mods, so you can use warding mods. In terms of using your augments to get up, depending on how much money you have, these are much cheaper choices. The advanced augments 45s, you can get them usually a lot cheaper than getting the 73 augment. And you can use an MK10 kit instead of an MK11. But, do the math, check the prices. Sometimes it's just as cheap to get the 73s with an MK11 kit, depending on the current prices on the G. We're going to be using the relic that gives us critical for level 70 content, and I still tend to use it for level 75. And then you're going to also want to get for level 75 the one that gives you mastery or the one that gives you power. I believe power is usually considered a bit better, not totally sure on that. The other thing we could do is we could have a relic that's clickable that gives us alacrity boost. I choose not to run that on this character. I don't like the way that the rotation can go a little bit wonky when you're changing your alacrity middle of the rotation. So I like to keep it so it's pretty consistent and we don't have any major issues. So there's our gearing. You can be using concentrated fire set until you get your Apex Predator set. And if you really don't have a set yet at all, you can even use stationary grit to do a decent amount of additional damage while standing still. That's kind of the easiest of the easy sets to get. I wouldn't spend anything on it, just if you happen to pick it up while doing stuff. But definitely make sure you get that primed ignition right away. All right, so that's our gear, our stats. let's look at what we've got for utilities. Now, there's always going to be a few options for utilities, but let's just quickly go through them all. So this one doesn't even matter unless maybe PvP it might matter. We're not going to focus on PvP. We're going to be fully focused on player versus environment. So this one again, no reason to want it for player versus environment. This one absolutely great. If there's a chance that you're going to get stunned, knocked down, so on. But otherwise, it's just one of those ones that you don't really need to take very often. You can take it once in a while. I forget which fight we were on that I took it. There was a bit of a stun. This is great. Recharge cells now immediately recharges 15 additional cells and grants 10% alacrity. That's definitely worth taking to increase your damage by keeping your energy up better. Hail of Bolts, your main spammable AoE, increases damage by 25%. That would be a good one to take. It would be better than this one, the Paralactic Combat Stims in most sticky mods. Never use this one personally, but there could be reasons why you might want to use it outside of PvE. Shoot FOE. This is a great one. I like it. I always take it. You get a melee and range defense is increased by 3%. And then when you activate Field Aid on yourself, or an object exciser reduces all periodic damage taken by 30% for 12 seconds. So if we look, Field Aid is basically our self-cleanse here. So potentially could be useful. If you're taking periodic damage for whatever reason. And then this one, because I don't use these abilities very often, it's not very useful. Advanced line, hold line duration increased by 4 seconds. There could be times when you want to take this. I just find that most of the time there's better stuff, so I don't take it. Electro Shield. This is going to actually help increase your damage. So when activated, your reactive shield charges with electricity, zapping the attackers whenever they deal damage to you. So this can be useful when you have nothing better to take and you just want to do a bit more damage. But there's going to be a lot of scenarios where you might want something. Charge Barrier. This allows Charge Bolts, which we don't really use. Grab Round, which we use a lot. Medical Probe, which we don't really use. Create a Charge Barrier that reduces damage taken by 1% for 15 seconds, stacks up to 5 times. So basically, you're going to get a flat 5% DR for the majority of the fight because of how often we're using Grab Round. Great utility to take. Charge Reserves reduces the cooldown of Field Aid and disabling shot by 3 seconds. So basically, you're going to reduce the cooldown of your Interrupt and your Cleanse. Not super useful. In addition, you build 10 stacks of Supercharge over the course of using Recharge and Reload. So basically, if you want to get your 10 stacks at the start of the fight, just using your regular channeled heal and energy regen. Otherwise, I really never take that ability. Reflect Shield. When you take damage, the active cooldown of reactive shield is reduced by 3 seconds. This is amazing. Love it. Just take it. Okay. Overclock. Reduce the cooldown of Concussive Round and Tech Override by 15 seconds, and Tech Override gets 2 charges. There's times where you might want to take this. This is very rare that I ever use it. And it's very hard to utilize properly, but there may be scenarios where you want it, especially if there's going to be a lot of AoE stuff that you're doing in your rotation. It can be quite useful. Reflective Battery. Activating Concussion Charge generates 2 stacks of Supercharge and heals you and up to 7 other allies within 8 meters. Concussion Charge heals blah, 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 blah. So really, as DPS, this is not a useful ability. You're not going to take it. Combat Shield. Reactive Shield now further decreases ability activation pushback by 30%, increases all healing received by 20%, and makes you immune to interrupts. This is just good. That's all I can say about it. So now under here, Adrenal Surge, one of my favorite heroic utilities. You don't necessarily take it in every fight, but when you do take it, holy crap, do you heal yourself. This just makes your adrenaline rush do so much healing. It's friggin' amazing. Love it. Okay, Shock Absorber. Certain fights you have to take this. This is your 30% AoE damage reduction. Force March. This allows Bolt Storm to be used while moving. Absolutely take it. Absolutely take it. Just makes your rotation so much easier. One-man army. I wouldn't really suggest this for PvE personally. Use your Electronet. You don't get to put it out very often. Supercharged Cells does reduce the cooldown of Adrenaline Rush by 5 seconds, which is nice, but really more of a PvP focusing. Smoke Screen. I'm not really going to go over this one. I don't use it. Trauma stabilizers, I like this one, you get a little bit of self-healing, but you might not always want to take this one. Supercharged defense, this is pretty good. Activating supercharged cells increase your defense chance by 15%, grants immunity and interrupts for 8 seconds. Endurance is increased, all healing received is increased. Can be useful in certain boss fights, or just a lot of trash calls if you're pulling aggro with your AoE. And then this one for stealth scan, never used it personally. So there you go, that's the utilities. One of the most important things to know about this rotation is there's a proc we have called Curtain of Fire. The Curtain of Fire resets Bolt Storm. So if I shoot Bolt Storm, I can reset it either using Grab Round or Hail of Bolts. So when I use this, and then if I shoot my Hail of Bolts right away, you'll see it's been reset. And now I can use it immediately again. And then if we use Grab Round, you'll notice it doesn't get, it did get reset right away. So let's use another Grab Round, and you'll notice it's not getting reset. So it can only get reset every so often. The general idea is that you just need a few GCDs in between. So how this rotation is set up, you have to be very careful. If you proc Curtain of Fire with any ability, it doesn't matter if Bolt Storm is off cooldown or not. So you're going to notice here, I'm not able to put Bolt Storm off. Oh, I was able to put it off cooldown right away. So if you leave a bit of a gap between this one, it takes 2 GCDs to channel this whole ability. We do Bolt Storm. I had a little bit of a pause in there. And then we're going to do our Grab Round. It takes full GCD to hit, allows it to reset. But now if we do our Hail of Bolts to proc it right away, cancel it early, go straight into Bolt Storm. Oh, damn. Screwed that up. So we're going to do that. We're going to go into our Bolt Storm. And then we're going to go into a Grab Round right away. Notice, it didn't reset it. We didn't have enough time in between. So how I've got my rotation set up is everything centered around Vortex Bolt at the start of the rotation. And we're going to hit Vortex Bolt every time it comes off cooldown. So we're going to do a Vortex Bolt. We're going to do a Bolt Storm, which channels for 2. We're going to try and clip the last 0.1 seconds of it off. But again, this is a very advanced thing. Don't worry about it, until you get really good at the rotation. We're going to use a Grab Round, which is instant cast thanks to Vortex Bolt. That's going to reset our Bolt Storm. We're going to do a demo round next, just to help smooth out some alacrity potential issues of resetting your next Bolt Storm. And then we're going to go into Bolt Storm. So Vortex Bolt followed by demo round, highest damaging abilities, and then Bolt Storm. But we want to make sure we're using 2 Bolt Storms inside of the primed ignition tactical window. So we're going to use those pretty early on. And now we're going to go into 2 more Grab Rounds usually. The first one does not reset our Bolt Storm, but the second one will. So the first one can be replaced with a Hammer Shot, an Electronet, etc. And then we're going to go into a High Impact Bolt, because now we're out of the primed ignition window. Our High Impact Bolt will have the 3 procs, so it'll be glowing, deal the highest amount of damage it can. And then we're going to have 2 abilities left, because this is a 12 GCD rotation. So depending on where our energy level is at, we're either going to do Grab Round, because it's going to be our highest damaging ability, unless Electronet's ready. And then we're going to use Hammer Shot when we have to worry about energy. So we're just going to go through this a little bit slower, not clicking it really fast, so things will come off cooldown, not exactly in order, but I just want to show you one tie. So generally, I usually just start with my Electronet right at the start of a fight. There are some fancy openers I've made up. I'm not going to talk about those ones. One of them involves using Hail of Bolts early on to get the Curtain of Fire proc out of the way. And then you can use a Grab Round straight into a Vortex Bolt, which will fluff your numbers a little bit. But it's very hard to time, especially when a tank's pulling. So if the tank starts saying 3, you could do this exactly when he says 3, 2, and then pre-cast your Grab Round. But it's a bit tricky. The other one that I built was a little bit more complex. You had to adjust some rotations. I'm not going to go inside and look at the guide if you want. So first Electronet, go into our Vortex Bolt, let our Bolt Storm go. We want to try and clip it right at that last 0.1 second. We're going to go reset, Bolt Storm is up, and then we get a Grab Round. The first one's not going to reset it because I was a bit slow. Go into here, and then we do, right now our energy's really good, so we could actually do straight 2 more Grab Rounds for rotation. So generally where my hammer shots will go is they quite often will go that second grab round in the rotation after the second bolt storm. I might use a grab round there instead of a hammer shot there for energy management instead of that first grab round. I find it works really well there, and then do my next grab round. Now the thing is, if for some reason your high impact bolt isn't glowing yet, because you used a hammer shot there instead of a grab round, it's totally okay to do one more grab round and then do your high impact bolt. Do a grab round, hammer shot, high impact bolt. High impact bolt, as long as you get to it before you get back to vortex bolt. One thing that I do that helps me know if I've got enough time to fit all 12 GCDs in or not, because sometimes certain things prevent you from being able to fit all 12 GCDs, whether that be user error or ability activation pushback, is we've got the timer set up for the number of seconds, and then once it gets down to a certain point, it's actually going to start showing us tenths of a second. So what I'm looking for is, let's say I've just done my high impact bolt, and I want to say if there's 2.6 seconds when I do my next shot after a high impact bolt, I know I'm definitely going to fit 2 more attacks. If I do my high impact bolt and I have my 2 GCDs left, and I go and I click my first grab round and I see I'm below 2 seconds on the vortex bolt cooldown, I'm not going to do a 12th ability. I'm just going to wait a little bit for vortex bolt to come off cooldown and go straight into it. So we're just going to show how it looks again. We're going to do this, a little clip. I don't think we really got it. That time we got it. That was a nice clip. So as you can see, I cast the first one. I'm below 2 seconds, so I'm just going to wait for it to come up. The clip I'm talking about here, if you look at our channel bar, we really want to get it when there's we want to get it so that it never actually hits 0 when we start seeing our grab round channel. So if we look again, usually what I ended up doing is right around 0.3 seconds is when I click. So see how there's a brief second there where it kind of disappeared our cast bar? That means it's a little late on clipping it. Let's see if we can get our clipping a little bit better. That was pretty good. That was an instant cast though, so it's pretty hard to tell. So as you can see, we went straight into that channel. That's what we want. So what we want to do is we can actually shave off 0.1 seconds from our bolt storm and still get that 4th tick. But again, this is very advanced. Don't try and do it too much, because if you cancel it, if it shows up as canceled, you're not going to get that 4th tick. So we'll purposely cancel it here. As you can see, it came up canceled. That's bad. We lost a tick. That's a big damage loss. So it's better to not clip it if you're canceling it. So keep that in mind. All right. So during this rotation, the only time that we're not going to be mobile is all the grab rounds after the instant cast one. Everything else in this rotation is mobile, but you're going to feel like dog's ass when you have to try and move and you're at the part with the 2 grab rounds. So technically you do have tech override. I've moved it to place on my bar. One over here for when I want to do my AoE rotation and I want plasma grenade to be instant, and one over here when I want grab round to be instant. So let's go straight into our rotation, then I'll show you. So we're going to go... Notice we've got a lot of energy early on in the fight. We'll fit in one more. And we're going to want to use, on our bolt storm is the only time we want to use reserve power cells. Right now, we're at the very beginning of our rotation. We're going to want to try and drain our energy to maximize our DPS. Assuming, this is a boss fight and we're shooting at a single target right now. So I'm just going to be pumping out my full rotation, not going to be using any hammer shots, because I've still got this bad boy, recharge cells. Once we hit about 35 energy, or cells, that's when we're going to want to look at using our, there we go, we just hit it. So look at that, all of our energy problems are fixed now. And now we have to actually start thinking about our energy management. So our energy management, the important thing to know is that when you get too low on, I think it's at 60% of your cells, when you hit 60%, your actual recharge rate of your cells is going to drop. So right now, I'm actually going to use one hammer shot in there just to make sure that I'm not going to run into any issues with energy. Again, we're starting to get a little bit low, but we're still floating at that nice number. Just canceled my bolt storm, so that was a really bad clip there. I watch for that. Those are definitely things you don't want to do. Now my energy's low enough, I'm going to use one hammer shot and then go into grab round just to make sure. You know, screwing up your energy, it can downward spiral so quickly that you really want to be careful. Of course, the nice thing there is that we had the supercharged cells just give us a pop of energy. So remember, they also add 10 cells or 10 energy every time you use them. So that's another opportunity to not have to use a hammer shot as much. Right now, again, we're flirting with low energy. So I'm just going to use that hammer shot in there just to make sure we're not going to have issues. Now we've got to reserve power cells up, so we can be a little bit greedy, but not too greedy. I'm going to not take that risk, and I'm going to use it right there. Wasn't a great time to use it because I ended up having supercharged cells come up, so kind of a waste there, but on the plus side, this means that we can easily fit in 2 grab rounds right on the end. Now, I haven't been paying a lot of attention to make sure that I'm not screwing up the use of, or the timing on fitting 12 GCDs. I've been assuming that I can fit all 12, but now we've got tons of energy management available with our recharged cells. So again, this is an area where, unless you need to save it for a different part of the boss fight, you're just going to be going all out so that you can use that as quickly, so that you can use as much grab rounds as possible without having to use your hammer shot for energy management. Again, main idea is hammer shot is a loss of energy, but I thought I hit supercharged cells. We're going to use a hammer shot there because we were definitely running low on energy. We're going to use it again, just to be cautious. And then I should have used Vortex Bolt there. I tried to cancel what I was doing and use a Vortex Bolt. I was just a little bit late. So the reason why that's so hard to switch sometimes is the fact that if we look under our preferences and we go under controls and we go under combat, ability activation key window. I've set this to 0.5 seconds. I found that 0.25 does not consistently work and you have some issues. You're going to have some issues with lag and abilities not popping. 0.5 just smooths it out. What it means is that in 0.5 seconds from being able to use your next ability, if you press a key, that ability gets locked in. So you can't change your mind, but it helps deal with lag. So that allows me to click ability before the GCD finishes coming off cooldown, and then that ability gets queued up. And it really helps. I don't like setting it too high because then you can't change your mind at the last second. As you saw there, I wasn't quite able to changing it back into my Vortex Bolt. Now, if you were watching with the Apex Predator set there, there's quite a few different little buffs that I get. Main thing that you want to keep aware of, and personally I don't look at it too much, is the fact that you get a free grab round every so often when you have enough stacks. And so this is why, one of the reasons why Apex Predator set is so good is because it's much easier to manage your energy, because you're going to find that some of your grab rounds just don't take any energy. So you saw that last one there, did not take any energy. So that's really nice when that happens. Part of the set bonus. Concentrated fire, you're going to be finding that you're using more hammer shots than the Apex Predator set, but don't forget that supercharged cells gives that little pop every so often, so that's going to help you a lot. So just quick demo here about the mobility. As you can see, I can move around thanks to that utility. The important thing is that you don't turn your back to the enemy, you will cancel your ability. You just want to make sure that you're using your strafing keys, and that, if you're turning and running, that you're only running sideways. If you turn around too far, you're no longer going to be shooting. Because we are using grab rounds to reset our bolt storms, potentially we can actually use hail bolts. The important thing to note about grab round, though, is that it can either be instant cast or channeled. So at the very start of our rotation, it's instant cast. So if you watch, it will reset the cooldown immediately at the beginning of that channel. But if we look here, it won't reset it until the end of that channel, because that's when it hits. So just always keep that in mind. If you need to throw in some hail of bolts instead of grab rounds, you can do that. But the way that this rotation is set up is you'd go your Vortex Bolt, Bolt Storm, and then you could use hail of bolts right here if you wanted. Reset it, and then you can go back into it. And then got this. That's not going to reset it. Oh, it did reset it. Okay. Just be mindful of where it resets. I will quickly go over the AoE. I don't like it very often. It's very rare that it's that useful. The general idea with the AoE is you're going to want to hit something with your grab round. Then you're going to use an instant cast plasma grenade, which will spread your grab round effect to every enemy affected by it. And then you're going to use your demolition round, which will now hit every enemy that's been impacted by your grab round's armor break. And then after that, you've got mortar volley, which is your strongest AoE you can pick, and then you basically just spam bolts, and hopefully you'd have, chain gunnery passive taken at that time. Make it deal even more damage. You can use explosive round, it's not any good, so I don't really use it. And I really only use plasma grenade when I'm using it with the AoE tactical, otherwise it's just hail of bolts. The important thing to notice, though, is that this AoE is not real strong, and you're going to want to make sure that this AoE rotation without the tactical, that you're hitting at least 3 enemies. Even with hitting 3 enemies, it can still be fairly weak without the tactical. With the tactical, it's pretty reasonable, but most of the content you're going to be doing, chances are everything's going to be dying so fast that, it's kind of, you can't pull off the tactical effectively all the time. So one of the things that really you want to think about with your damage uptime is how much damage you're getting from primed ignition tactical with vortex bolt. So you want to be very careful to think about how much health the enemy has left and how you're going to get the most damage out of that. So when you're shooting a boss, single target, lots of health, it doesn't matter. You're only shooting him the whole time. But as soon as you have to start thinking about swapping between enemies, you really want to think about that vortex bolt should be put on an enemy that has enough health that you can get through almost your full rotation before it dies. You don't want to be putting it on an enemy who's almost dead, where you'll get like 2-3 shots off and then swap targets. So you really want to think, if an enemy's almost dead, can I swap to a target that has higher health, use my vortex bolt on him, to get higher single target damage through that primed ignition tactical. There are times where, it might be required that there's a DPS target swap. If it's a scenario where it's not an immediate, like, hey, this thing has to be shot down as fast as possible, generally I will finish out my rotation to just before the high impact bolt, so that I get the majority of my primed ignition tactical benefit, and then I'll put that last grab round before high impact bolt on the new enemy, and then I can hit with my high impact bolt and I'm outside of the vortex burn window. There might be some fights though where you have to switch targets immediately because the damage is just required. If that's the case, just switch targets. It's fine. Carry on with the rotation as is. If you're at the point with high impact bolt, remember that the armor break has to be applied, or target suffering from periodic damage. So you just have to be careful. Sometimes you won't be able to use high impact bolt on an enemy right away. So if that's the scenario, you can just shoot them with the grab round if you're at the high impact bolt point where you swap and you can't hit them with it. Hopefully that makes a lot of sense. That's one of the biggest things you can do to help increase your DPS when you're in an actual fight scenario, is timing that target swap with vortex bolt to try and not waste the primed ignition. It's going to make up a large amount of your DPS, probably around 15 to 20% of your total DPS, I believe, comes from primed ignition. You're going to find about 7 to, I think it's around 6% actually, of your DPS is going to come from your armor penetration amplifiers. And then the rest are just going to come from your set bonus and you pulling off the rotation correctly. I have managed to do in level 75 gearing and content on a dummy, I have managed to hit 22,000 DPS. So it's definitely quite viable DPS. Not too bad. I'm just going to take a quick boo here and see where we are in our tutorial. All right, so that's your rotation. We've talked about the option to throw in some AoE. Talked about the importance of doing single target as much as possible unless you're able to hit a lot of enemies. Even in an area where you think you can AoE, it's generally better to do single target, especially if you still have your primed ignition tactical on. Now, the rotation is very simple. It's very fixed. There's really not much that needs to be discussed. Obviously, you want to think about using your threat drop in certain raid scenarios to help prevent pulling off the tank right at the beginning of the fight. But you're not the burstiest class, so usually it's not too big of an issue early on pulling off the tank. But I've definitely played with a lot of tanks who aren't as experienced and constantly pulled threat off of them with this class because I've gotten so good at it, and they're just not as good at their tanking. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about how your defensives work. So reactive shield is just straight up increased damage reduction, 25% for 12 seconds. It's not extremely strong, but it just reduces damage against everything. So, it's just generally, your most basic, like, hey, I just want to take some less damage. You just started shooting a big group of enemies. The nice thing about this one is every time you get hit, the cooldown gets reduced, so you can use it a lot more. So, generally you will use it a bit more liberally than all of your other defense. Echoing Deterrence, this one is amazing. This is your reflect, and it heals you. So this reflects all damage that is not AoE, that is not melee, basically, is the best way to think about it. And you also get healed. So it's great. Sometimes you might want to time it to benefit from the healing and not just from the reflecting itself. And then Adrenaline Rush, straight up self-heal, great ability, does a lot for you. If you happen to carry Shield Adrenals, these also act like a defensive. Absorb 30% of damage up to a certain amount for 15 seconds. So it's kind of like your reactive shield, except that there's a cap on how much damage that it can mitigate. And of course, med packs can also be considered defensive if you need that quick healing at the end. Unity, if you're playing content with a companion, this is a great one. Both you and your companion get 50% damage reduction. And then Heroic Moment, this provides 2% healing every 3 seconds. So this is one that you want to kind of use early on when you know you're going to be taking some damage to benefit from that slow periodic ticks of healing throughout the fight. You don't want to wait until you're already low on health. Hold the line generally is just used in situations where you know you're going to get knocked around, flung around, and you don't want to be knocked around. And then your Concussion Charge, it's a great knockback. It also slows enemies. So as a ranged player, there's times when you're doing PvE where it's nice to knock melee units away from you so they're not hitting you in the face and they take longer to get back to you. You've got your basic Cryo Grenade, which is going to freeze a single target even if they take damage. And then you've got Concussive Round, which will stun an enemy for 60 seconds, but if they take damage, they're going to break that early. And then you've also got your Propulsion Round, which is an amazing mobility aid, although it's a bit annoying that you have to go backwards. So say we're running this way and we wanted to just go a little faster. It's a little annoying having to quickly turn around and press the button. So I've got this hotkey really close to my movement keys on my keyboard, so it's very easy for me to just use my mouse to whip around, press it, and then keep going in the direction I'm. Alright, so I wanted to show you in practice how some of this works. I've loaded up CZ-198. I'm going to leave on my Primed Ignition Tactical because most of these enemies die so fast that I'm not going to get any real advantage having the AoE Tactical out. If you look at my stats, you'll now see what I was talking about. We're set to level 56 actually, not even level 70. You can see how we've got gold colors here indicating that these values have been modified from my actual stats. You'll notice that my crit's a lot lower because I had to beef up my alacrity with the guild perk currently not being active. You need to reset that for us. Alright, so a group like this, pretty simple, weak enemies. Now we're just going to go in here. Probably should have started with my the water volley. That was a bit of a mistake there. I'm not going to use my vortex bolt right now, just because that guy's going to die real soon. I didn't want to waste it. So in this scenario, nice AoE situation. We don't have our tactical on. I'm just going to shoot everything, and then I'm going to go into my single target rotation on the silver here. I'm not going to get through a full rotation, sadly, but we'll just carry on a rotation. We'll switch off into the next enemy. Alright, so we'll pause this here and we'll come back and we're fighting the boss. Alright, so I'm going to set my companion to peace, just so that we don't have to worry about it making this fight seem a little better. I would like to have an opportunity to show you some of the defenses we can use here as well. We'll go through a single target rotation. See my health starting to get a bit low. Could have used my reactive shield in the beginning. So now I'm going to go straight to Vortex Bolt and screw something up there. Now I'm going to use my Reflect so I can get that self-healing, and the enemy is doing no damage to me at the same time. As you can see, a lot of self-healing out of that Reflect, and I waited to use it until I was lower on health, but it was a great opportunity to use Reflect, as that enemy does range damage that I can reflect again. So we'll just wander around a little bit, kill a few more things, just get a general idea of, you know, some of the different group compositions. So this one has a gold in it. So I'm just going to single target the gold. Now you got to be careful too, obviously, with groups. Sometimes you want to kill all the little weak enemies first because they're doing a lot of damage to you while you're trying to kill the big fatty gold one. But, you know, that group was not an issue. It wasn't very threatening. These guys, not a good use of AoE to try and hit both at the same time, but I just wanted to kill the weaker enemy, get him out of the way, without using my Vortex Bolt. I could have killed him by using grab rounds. Could have shot him with a demo round. I prefer to keep that in my single target rotation. But generally, you know, you don't want to use Bolt Storm or Vortex Bolt on the weaker enemies. So this guy, I'm just going to ping him with a hammer shot. General idea is I want all the enemies up, so that way we're supposed to stay grouped for my AoE and they did not. So again, at this point, really not much to do. They're really weak enemies. We're just going to go through, pull them down like that. This group up here, you know, gives us something a little more interesting to do. We look at killing that guy or stunning him first and then going into gold, as he does the high single target. He has the high health, and my single target rotation is a little more effective on him. Hopefully that gives you a general idea of how you might be using it. I thought I could give you some more examples, but there's really not a big need to give a lot of different examples of how to play this class. It's pretty simple. You know, the main thing, of course, to remember is that you've only got a certain amount of window that you're mobile in, and you can't be mobile during the grab rounds that are hard cast without using a tech override. So, you know, your hammer shot's going to be the best way to keep up your damage. So one of the biggest things that prevents players from having good sustained damage on something like an operation when you're doing a harder boss fight is the fact that you're going to be not attacking the boss during times that you have to move, doing mechanics and stuff like that. So it's really, really important that you get good at being able to target swap effectively and keep shooting at all times. And sometimes that means that you're going to be using your hammer shot because you have nothing else that you can use while moving. You know, and that's one thing it's a more advanced skill, you know. As you can see right now, my rotation's all over the place because I can kill little weak guys. So, you know, that's something that comes with practice and time as well, is knowing, you know, how to get back into your rotation when it's messed up. I'm not going to go over that specifically. I find with this class it's pretty easy to get back into rotation. It's a big DPS loss to do it, but you can always just hammer shot your way out of any problems that you've encountered. I would suggest trying to avoid that as much as possible. But again, the key thing to remember is that every time Vortex Bolt comes off cooldown, it's going to be an starting rotation. The biggest problem that you're going to have is sometimes your Bolt Storm itself won't be off cooldown. And you go into your the start of your rotation after Vortex Bolt, you might have screwed something up there. And so we're going to hop back into the stronghold. Actually, wait. I'll hop back to our stronghold and I'll quickly show you that.
You're back.
Alright, so now we've teleported to our stronghold, and I'll just start off with a Bolt Storm to show you what I'm talking about. So it's not going to be off cooldown than we do here. So what we'll do is we'll actually do our grab round first, and then we'll just continue our rotation like normal. So the only difference here is that, as you can see, I couldn't see, I did something weird. But it's very easy to get back into our rotation. You know, it's been designed in such a way that, you know, if you need to just grab around your way out of things, you can always add one more grab round into that rotation. You can see just enough time to do another ability before Vortex Bolt. So let's try that one more time. We're going to shoot our Bolt Storm right away, put it in a weird spot. Go in here. So now we've done 2 Bolt Storms, I believe, and it just got reset, so that's good. What am I screwing up? Something's weird. Maybe I'm not doing my second Bolt Storm. I'm not totally sure there. One of the most common problems that we're going to run into is that you're not going to reset your Bolt Storm properly. So that's especially as you're learning the rotation as a newer player. So if we cast our grab round first here and then we go into rotation, we're going to find out that we don't reset our Bolt Storm right away. Not a big deal. As soon as you notice that, just do another grab round. And then we can go into here and we can do 2 grab rounds. And then do a third one. So the thing is, because of the way the grab round reset works at the beginning and at the end, you can have a few different combinations of how many abilities it takes to reset. So the way we've got a rotation set up initially is that first reset happens with an instant cast grab round. So the first reset is at the very beginning of a grab round. So we have 1 GCD. We channel the Bolt Storm right after, well, we do a demo round after that. That's 2 GCDs. We channel our Bolt Storm for 2 more GCDs. That brings us to a total of 4. We do our first grab round. It hits at the end of that. That's 5 GCDs. It usually does not take it off of cooldown. We do 1 more grab round, and that takes it off cooldown. So when we are taking it off cooldown, with one that isn't an instant, we're going to need a little bit more room. So there we go. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then there we go. So sometimes at the end of the 5th GCD, you'll reset it. Sometimes you're going to have to reset it on the 6th GCD. It just really depends. So right now the rotation is built so that we go, count again. So that's the reset. We got 1 GCD, 2 GCDs, 3, 4, 5, and then if it hasn't reset it at the end of that 5th one, that's why we've got this second grab round is usually the one that resets it. So because this first grab round reset at the beginning of a GCD, it counts as 1, and then we get 2 for a demo, 3, 4 for a Bolt Storm, 5 because it's at the end of the next grab round, and then 6. So you're always guaranteed to reset it after 6 GCDs, and sometimes you'll reset it after 5 GCDs. And then once we've reset it with that 3rd grab round in the rotation right before High Impact Bolt, we've still got High Impact Bolt as 1 GCD. You're always guaranteed, unless you've really screwed up, you should be guaranteed to fit in 1 more GCD, but our rotation is designed that we should actually be hitting 2 more. That should bring us to a total of 3. We've got our Vortex Bolt, which is 4. We've got Bolt Storm channeled for 2, which is 6. So the next grab round's an instant cast. It's at the beginning of the 6 GCD. So I built this rotation that we're resetting it every 6 GCDs, which gives us 1 extra GCD, a buffer for any mistakes or errors, and allows you to kind of reorganize when you have those little small issues. Now, if for some reason you've really, really, really screwed up royally, and you're sitting there and you're thinking like, oh crap, like my Bolt Storm, can't get it off cooldown, and like there's so much time left on it. Let's say, there we go, we just reset it there. There. Now this one, it's not going to instant. This instant doesn't reset it. That really sucks. So we go reset it. Now we're going to be getting out of our primed ignition window pretty soon. As soon as you're about 4 seconds left on here, you're out of your primed ignition window. I wouldn't really worry too much about resetting it. Now we can just wait and go back in. Something like that. There's a few different ways to do it. In general, the most important thing is just to practice this rotation, get the muscle memory down. But that way you're just not making mistakes. One of the most common mistakes that will happen for me still, or challenges, is say that I have to be moving during these next grab rounds. So, I've done this, and now I've got to move, and now I've got a hammer shot, and I'm like, oh gosh, I can't do my rotation right. Well, this grab round is going to reset Bolt Storm at a very awkward time. So, right there, I reset it, but my Vortex Bolt was ready to go up. And now I've got this problem. If I just reset it, I don't have enough GCDs to go straight into Vortex Bolt, use Bolt Storm, and then reset it. So what I could do here is I could go, I'd reset it, and then I could go into Vortex Bolt, which is 1 GCD, 2, 3, 4, and use something else, or just 2 grab rounds in a row here, and then I'd be able to reset it. So, we do have the flexibility to move the demo round before that grab round, if you know that you're going to need to try and get that reset to line up a little better. The other option too is, say that you just barely missed resetting it with that first instant cast grab round. You could always use your tech override to get another instant grab round rather than waiting or a slow one and having it reset at the end. Part of the reason why this is not super important with this rotation. As I said, I built 6 GCDs for every reset so that you don't have to worry about that tight timing. If we're talking about the very initial 5 GCD timing to get that nice reset on the second grab round, so this next one I'm going to cast, that becomes very important to have the right timing. As you can see, it didn't reset there. Not very consistent if it resets with 5 GCDs, so that's why I built it at 6. Alright, so I just want to talk a little bit about StarParse and how StarParse can be used to improve your skills and your rating abilities. So right now I've got a few windows floating over my screen. These are from StarParse. So this is a third-party program you can use. Some people do have some minor performance issues running it along with their game on very crappy computers, but for most people it should be fine. So this gives you a bunch of useful information that you can look at. You can see your damage, DPS, damage per second. You can see, how much threat you're generating, which for a DPS should generally be the exact same as the damage per second. So you get to see, you can do things like heals per second on here, damage taken per second. See, how well are you keeping certain abilities active throughout the fight. So highlight and see, what amount of the fight are they staying up for. Let's see, I think I've got a longer one. So here we go. So target lock, that's not super important. Charge barrier, not super important. Supercharge, pretty good uptime on that. That's nice. Where is... So, here we go. Charge cells. So this is how often supercharge cells came up. Here's where I use my reserve power cells recharge. So one of the big things, with some classes it's very important. With this one, it's not as important. You can go under your damage here. You can look at your breakdown by ability, see how much each one's doing, seeing if you're missing or not. If you have an offhand, expect to see misses because offhands don't get the same accuracy as your main hand. You can do healing, damage taken tab to see if you're taking too much damage, what kind of damage it is, why, so on. And then here's your combat log. This gives you a nice, very detailed breakdown of different things, timings. This is pretty advanced, but sometimes I'll use this to see stuff. You can also see when abilities are active with color coding on the side. Know that you're under the effect of something. And then if you're in a raid group, you can have the raid tab to see everybody who's connected to that raid group to see how they're doing. There's also built-in timers that you can set up. You don't really need too much for Gunnery commando in this respect for chasing down procs and keeping track of things. But on certain fights, knowing when you need to do certain mechanics and stuff, they're really nice. So if we look at the windows I do have right now, I'd have my raid damage window. So if we go to our currently active, start shooting. Oops, I didn't press the raid button. That's now, because I've pressed the raid button on the StarParse, I'm the only one currently in here, but you can see, just my damage here. And then this timer window can be quite useful for certain fights as well. This is any timers you turned on, you can get them to display as text in here. Some classes will use this to actually show them when they want certain procs and certain abilities are going to be ready again. But as I said, we built a very fixed static rotation that's based around the idea of Vortex Bolt controlling the whole thing and maximizing our primed ignition tactical. So it's really not as useful. There's not many things you need to set up. That's one of the things that I really like about this class. You provide an armor break through your grab round, which makes the target take more damage from basically everybody. So it helps the whole raid. The biggest downside, though, is that your raid buff sucks. Generally, your healer will be the only one using this raid buff out of the troopers in the group. It's just not a very good raid buff. So generally, you won't use it, as you'd much rather use your supercharged cells and give yourself that bit extra. Yeah. I hope that taught you quite a bit about Gunnery Commando and the basics of how to get better at doing DPS. You just got to practice that rotation. You got to practice in harder, challenging situations where you've got to deal with target swapping, you've got to deal with etc. And a tool like StarParse will allow you to consistently compare your results to make sure that you're getting the same uh, level of damage as you're expecting to be getting for, and being able to measure and improve yourself. So have fun playing.